Okay folks, we need to talk about Trevor Wallace because his ex just revealed the dirt on this guy, and this story is absolutely crazy. So while Trevor might present himself as a silly American youngster who participates in every modern day trend, apparently this is not the real Trevor. Now most people don't know this, but apparently Trevor Wallace is actually Trevor Wallace, who grew up in Scotland and was actually a serious stage actor for many years. He was known to be obsessed with Shakespeare and never really even desired to go beyond the black box theaters he called home. But in 2016, Trevor Wallace gets offered an interesting opportunity to teach and perform Shakespeare in Xi'an, China. Now, this was a brand new theater program at a brand new college, and it's possible that Shakespeare had never even been performed in this Chinese province, and that really struck Trevor. So he felt it was his duty to see to it that this precious material was treated with the reverence it deserved. So the gifted young Scottish performer signs a contract with the Chinese company Douyin, and it's a pretty sweet deal. He gets paid a decent wage to teach 2 days a week, gets to perform Shakespeare weekly in a beautiful new theater himself, and all he has to do is make one small promotion video per week to encourage people to come out to the show. Now here's where things take a bizarre turn. So after making a few of these promo videos for the play, Trevor gets tired of the repetition and starts doing some characters and accents, and he quickly noticed those videos got more views. And one week while filming the promo, he does an American character he calls Trevor. And for whatever reason, this video blew up in China and actually made their play a huge success. But when Trevor saw the agency Douyin was making tons of money off these Trevor videos, he started to feel he had gotten a raw deal. All of a sudden, Trevor wasn't so interested in teaching the fine arts to eager students. So Trevor goes to Douyin and wants in on the money. And Douyin, surprisingly, is open to negotiations, but they weren't willing to pay Trevor outright, instead offering him an inside software royalty deal. And this ended up being a smart move for Trevor because by the end of the year, Douyin in China becomes the app TikTok released worldwide. And that's when Trevor Wallace blew up on the internet. And the sad irony here is that the character Trevor Wallace was originally designed to make fun of stupid Americans. And now the Shakespearean trained Scottish actor was going to be forced to portray this stupid character for the rest of his life. So how did Trevor make his millions of dollars if TikTok owns the character Trevor Wallace? Well, Trevor's inside software royalty deal is one like you've never heard of. So you might have noticed that in all of Trevor's videos, there's a zoom in at some point, and that's supposed to be the punchline, which by now has accrued millions of copycats using this zoom in punchline joke. Now, of course, this comes from shows like Arrested Development and The Office, who use the camera in effect as a character. And while you could never copyright a camera movement in a movie or TV show, these social media apps operate completely independently. And so Trevor actually owns the copyright to the zoom in punchline. So anytime anyone uploads a video to TikTok that uses this zoom in punchline, Trevor gets paid. And now that he's on top, he's not willing to give up the position. Now we only know any of this because Trevor's ex, acclaimed screenwriter Greta Gerwig, has come out against him. And apparently she says it took her a year to learn he was actually Scottish and faking the American accent, and that when he finally admitted to being 49 years old, she knew she had to get out. Now apparently, Trevor undergoes expensive medical treatments and takes hormone blockers to appear much younger than he actually is. And she claims he was so terrified of her outing him that he would send her videos of him punishing himself as some form of penance. And apparently the last straw was when Trevor sent a video of himself eating what looked to be human feces. Now instead of being silenced, Greta is finally talking about her year with Trevor, but it doesn't seem that Trevor's fan base has even heard this story, and Trevor's doing better than ever. In fact, he just signed a 3-year deal with the Sphere in Vegas, where they'll be playing all of his hit videos, culminating in the largest zoom punchline in human history, putting Trevor in the Guinness Book of World Records. Now this guy just keeps winning, and that's because he's one of the richest men in Scotland. And there's plenty more strange things about this weirdo, like the fact that he spent a reported $2 million on Pokemon hats, most of them being one-of-a-kind custom fit to his head, or the time that he posted a video mocking Kobe Bryant's death, turning the masses against him, but we'll have to save that for another episode. For now, Trevor Wallace, you're a total bitch. Now, a lot of people aren't ready to handle this information, so only share these videos with people that you know are ready for the TB truth. Okay folks, we need to talk about Steve Reni, because this guy's story is not what you think. Now we all know Steve lied about being in the World Trade Center on the morning of September 11th to impress Andrew Dice Clay's step-friend, but finally the reason why he did it is coming out. And in truth, it's shocking people fell for Steve's story in the first place, claiming he jumped from the roof of World Trade Center 1 using his suit jacket as a parachute. And in retrospect, the story is obviously a lie, but the public at the time bought it entirely. And apparently the truth is that Steve wanted to be associated with 9/11 for his own safety. Now this is about to get weird, so buckle up. So Steve Renazizi's last name is actually Raytheon, and he's the youngest son of Raymond Raytheon, owner of the Raytheon company that develops and manufactures advanced weapon systems for the military, government, and commercial customers. Now in Steve's defense, he wanted nothing to do with his powerful family's business, and was a silly guy who just wanted to perform. But Steve's family wouldn't allow for such a low-class occupation. Steve had been schooled in Sweden and spoke 4 languages. They weren't going to allow him to go off and be a clown. So Steve Renazizi does something very bold and leaves Pennsylvania, striking off on his own to Los Angeles in the year 2000. And a year later, while at the Comedy Store, Steve hears that Bert Kreischer's dad works for Merrill Lynch, and tries to get in with Bert by claiming he too worked for Merrill Lynch. And that's when Andrew Dice Clay's step-friend joined the conversation, asking Steve if he was working there during the recent attack on New York. Well, we all know the rest of this story. Steve lies and then has to stick with his story about parachuting down from the World Trade Center for many years to come. Now here's where it gets interesting. In truth, Steve was in Los Angeles on September 11th, but he was actually supposed to be on a camping trip on his family's massive estate. And that family estate in Stony Creek, Pennsylvania is exactly where the 3rd plane crashed on September 11th, leaving Steve to believe this was an intended hit on him. Now he wasn't sure if it was his family that had set him up or if he was being targeted by an outside force because of his family's name, but he was of course terrified. And this is partially why he continued to talk about his false 9/11 story. He felt he would be much safer if he was famous and associated with this event, instead of being an unknown Raytheon family member who could easily disappear without anyone ever knowing. So apparently Steve uses his 9/11 story to land big-time interviews, launching him into notoriety. And this even landed him his first real gig on the show Punk'd, after Ashton Kutcher realized it would be great publicity to have a 9/11 survivor scare celebrities. Any celebrity who lost their cool would be informed that Steve was a 9/11 survivor, which would immediately shut them up. And everyone knows Punk'd is where Steve met Dax Shepard and encouraged him to steal his friend's podcast idea. And this is also where Steve met his longtime girlfriend, singer of the female rock outfit The Donnas, Brett Anderson. So now Steve is on the rise in Hollywood, and after a few more roles, he lands a bigger spot on a show called The Lead. And this is a pivotal moment for Steve, because so far, technically, he's made it on his own. He might have been a liar, but he never used his powerful family to get where he was. But apparently, after working with Nick Kroll for a couple seasons of The League, Steve saw a new path. And everyone knows Nick Kroll grew up rich, it's no secret, and he's managed to maintain comedic credibility even so. So Nick is the one who talks Steve into rejoining his rich family and essentially playing ball. Nick was able to coach him into seeing things differently. In fact, his method was to not see things at all. Nick told Steve that being rich and ruthless was nothing to be ashamed of, and that he should actually feel guilty for not utilizing this blessing. So apparently the now famous Steve does indeed make up with his Raytheon family. And from the outside, it would seem to be a good thing. But this was also the same time that Steve dumped his longtime girlfriend and disappeared for 3 months, claiming he was making amends with his family. Now that wouldn't be so strange if there weren't these records of Steve flying to Syria and returning back 3 months later. And while some claim he's clearly doing undercover work, others speculate whatever he's doing, he's only doing it because he wants to keep performing. As a drastically rich person, you have to admit, he must actually love performing to continue on at this point. But sadly, Steve never really understood comedy to begin with. Steve thought that comedy was when you lie and then people laugh. And that's actually what caused the 2014 elevator beatdown of rapper Jay-Z by Solange Knowles. See, apparently Steve thought it would be funny to tell Solange Knowles at the MTV Movie Awards after party that he just saw Jay-Z kissing someone other than Beyonce. Now this was an outright lie, but again, Steve doesn't understand comedy, so he expected her to laugh. But we all know what happened instead. And once Steve had rejoined his powerful family, there was no longer a need to audition for a role. The Raytheon family member was now so known in the industry that he could waltz onto any set he wanted and take over. That's how he landed on Curb Your Enthusiasm in 2017, much to the chagrin of Larry David. And you might remember in 2018 when Steve was back in the headlines for wanting to play Harvey Weinstein in what he called a fair depiction, even going so far as to write a first draft of a script himself. And apparently this script was disturbing, not only for attempting to make Harvey Weinstein out as a victim, but for including multiple scenes where someone was forced to ingest human excrement. Now, needless to say, this script was entirely passed on, but gave us a window into the mind of Renazizi. And there's plenty more about this guy out there, including his plan to grow an entire new body for himself by 2026, and with the power of his family, this is most likely possible. But for now, Steve Renazizi, you're a total bitch. Okay, TB Nation, we're starting to pick up steam, but many people are threatening to tear us down. So rally together for the truth, the TB truth. Okay folks, we need to talk about Jimmy Fallon, because after years of murmurs within the industry, his devious acts have slowly been spilling out into the public. So everyone knows Jimmy Fallon came up through SNL and has hosted the family-friendly Tonight Show for the last decade. And though people have speculated that Jimmy's random injuries throughout the years have been caused by some sort of drunken accident, the truth is stranger than you'd believe. Now, to understand what could possibly be driving Jimmy Fallon to drink so much, you have to look back in time to right after he got the Tonight Show. Now, there was a series of episodes featuring then President Barack Obama, and this was a big deal at the time. But to secure this deal, Jimmy had to go through some type of government briefing that included taking him to an undisclosed location for 48 hours. And staff members have reported that after whatever Jimmy had seen at the secret meeting, he was no longer the same. Now, it's of course pure speculation what Jimmy saw and went through at this presidential briefing, but there are a lot of Area 51 message boards that claim Jimmy is being crushed by the weight he carries knowing the alien truth. Well, whatever the reason may be, apparently Jimmy does require drinking to maintain. And all that partying has allegedly gotten Fallon into some hot water. So back in 2015, there was a New York City bar called Rose Hill Tavern. And apparently this bar was owned by one Arnold Kessler, who you know today as Mike David. Now, Arnold Kessler was a successful child actor who was featured in movies like Little Big League and Major Payne, which also starred a young Orlando Brown before he became known as the famous rapper he is today. But young Arnold quickly saw the hollowness in Hollywood, and after age 14, left the industry entirely, much to the dismay of Warner Brothers, who wanted to see him as the lead on a CW show. So Arnold Kessler opens this bar in New York with a co-owner who was actually an SNL alumni. And one random night in 2015, Jimmy Fallon and the newly famous Thomas Middleditch stumble into this bar just at last call. Now, the bartender of course recognizes him and keeps the bar open just for Jimmy and his small crew. And these guys were in a rowdy mood for sure. They were both the kind of guys who would get drunk and act out after years of feeling overlooked and bullied. So most bartenders in the area knew to steer clear of these two rich bad boys. But this poor bartender had no idea. And while pouring them around, the bartender tells them who owns this bar, knowing that one of the owners had worked with Jimmy Fallon on SNL. Well, apparently, Jimmy was not a fan of this past unnamed co-worker, and the mood immediately soured. Now, the bartender says he wasn't even able to get the next sentence out of his mouth before the drunk Fallon swung at him, and very quickly there was a massive brawl occurring. Well, this is where it gets really bad. See, Arnold Kessler had left his phone at the bar office and had to come back into the city to get it, and he brought with him his 4-year-old son. And at the very moment Arnold and his son arrived and tried to enter, the brawl from inside spilled out into the streets, knocking poor little Simon Kessler into the street where a New York horse and buggy were passing. Tragically, Arnold's son did not make it that night, and his last words while looking up at his father with Rose Hill Tavern behind him was, "Red Bar." Now, Arnold Kessler knew there was no way he could win against Jimmy in court, and that's when he finally gave in to the Warner Brothers contract being offered to him and how he took up the role as the character Mike David. And so now you know why this host hates comedians and is on a mission to destroy these evildoers. And tragically, why his show is named in honor of his great loss. So Jimmy Fallon never gets held responsible for his horrific crime because at the time, he was being shielded by his network. But over time, the many other injuries and tragedies caused by Jimmy became impossible to keep under wraps. And everyone remembers a couple years ago when his staff started turning on him and threatened to release info about workplace mistreatment. But whatever happened to that story? Well, according to one former writer, Jimmy had spent up all the goodwill the network had and experienced a full role reversal that saw him groveling for forgiveness. And this writer alleges that at one meeting, Jimmy Fallon entered the room completely nude and then proceeded to eat what appeared to be human poop. And while some say that's just a disgruntled ex-writer trying to create a negative story about Fallon, others claim it might be some sort of shaming ritual to keep Jimmy in line. And since then, Jimmy's been playing ball. Now, online is another matter, as Fallon has started a feud with young comedic SNL group Please Don't Destroy, stating they are just ripping off Andy Samberg's digital short group, to which they shot back that Samberg was ripping off Jimmy Fallon. And that's when Andy Samberg got involved online, claiming that Jimmy Fallon was just ripping off Adam Sandler. Now, there's plenty more strange things about Jimmy Fallon, including his close friendship with his ex-wife, singer Vitamin C, as well as the era where Jimmy Fallon was pretending he was the lead singer of the band Chevelle. But we'll have to save that for another episode. Until then, Jimmy Fallon, you're a total bitch. Okay everyone, please remember, my life is in danger by sharing this information. And if I wind up missing, it's your duty to share this TB truth with the world. Okay, we need to talk about Tim Dillon, because this self-proclaimed open book has a lot of big secrets. So everyone knows Tim Dillon is the quick-witted comic with an incredibly successful podcast. And while Tim likes to dish about his drug-fueled criminal past, fans have recently been poking some big holes in these stories. While Tim has talked extensively about his childhood, schools, and rehabs, he's never actually provided any proof of any of this. And in fact, documents have recently surfaced indicating that Tim Dillon actually grew up in Hawaii. Apparently, his one-time best friend in high school has come out claiming that Tim Dillon never did a drug in his life, and even saying Tim was the captain of the high school football team. Now, while this seems hard to believe, in truth, Tim Dillon has always been shrouded in mystery, and you won't believe why. Tim Dillon is actually fully blind. You'll notice he's almost always wearing Stevie Wonder-like large sunglasses, even indoors. And if you've ever seen him perform live, you might have noticed there's a specific radius he never steps out of. So apparently, Tim Dillon intentionally blinded himself in a massive insurance scam. And to understand how we got here, you have to go all the way back to freshman year of high school, where Tim discovered the band Incubus. And he became a mega fan, claiming this group helped him get through some really tough times. And Tim was the kind of purist fan who didn't like that Incubus was lumped in with groups like Korn or Limp Bizkit. He saw Incubus as musically and lyrically superior to these other rap rock bands. And he couldn't stand low-grade copycats like Hoobastank or Audiovent. Even if they had Incubus's endorsement, Tim was fiercely protective, and he was reportedly enraged to see someone other than him as the Incubus mega fan on MTV's short-lived TV show, Fanatic, even vowing to one day kill the winner of that competition. So for 4 years of high school, Incubus is Tim Dillon's identity. But in the middle of 2003, Incubus's bassist Dirk Lance abruptly left the group, sending young Tim Dillon into a tailspin. He simply couldn't accept another lineup change in the band. You see, Incubus originally had a different DJ named Gavin, but in 1998 he was replaced with DJ Kilmore. And friends say Tim had already had a tough time accepting this new member. So when Dirk Lance leaves Incubus, sanity leaves Tim Dillon. He immediately drops out of college and starts committing petty crimes. After Morning View, nothing really mattered anymore. And when Incubus releases their first CD, A Crow Left of the Murder, with new bassist Ben Kenny, Tim started lashing out at the only friends he had left. Eventually, the troubled youth found himself locked up after sending threatening letters to the band, and even interrupting a live performance on Jimmy Kimmel, screaming, "You used to be a fusion band, and now you have as much bite as Gavin DeGraw." Well, as you can imagine, Tim eventually found himself broke, without a hope, and about to be evicted from his Hawaii apartment. And that's when he came up with this wild plot to temporarily blind himself and get on disability. So Tim does the unthinkable and pours a full bottle of Sour Punch Sobe into his eyes and stares at the sun for 30 seconds, blinding him for 3 days. Just enough time to prove he's blind and start landing big government checks. But that's when fate stepped in. See, for 3 days Tim couldn't see, so he never even thought to blink. And by the time his sight should have come back, he realized he was in fact permanently blinded from his lack of blinking. His eyes had completely dried out. And of course, Tim couldn't tell anyone what happened because they already thought he was blind. So Tim's lie became Tim's truth. So Tim finds himself blind in Hawaii on disability and living comfortably. He's no longer in danger of losing everything, and he's finally taken care of and safe. But that very quickly led to boredom. And now, with so much time on his hands, Tim found himself frequenting slam poetry contests, where he would enter and speak exclusively about Incubus's post-Dirk Lance album. Now, pretty much nobody in these slam poetry events knew what he was even talking about, but they found Tim funny and somewhat charming, and eventually one of the other performers recommended Tim try out an open mic comedy night with his material. Well, maybe it was in the stars, or maybe it was just in the zeitgeist of the time, but as soon as Tim got in front of the right audience, his anti-Incubus rants shot him into stardom in Hawaii, and after that, he became a touring comic and moved to Los Angeles. And you all know the rest about him getting pulled into the Roganverse and blowing up into the highest levels of financial domination, and he's gonna need that money for the lawsuit that's apparently coming his way. Apparently last week at the Comedy Store, Tim Dillon was informed after performing that the lead singer of Incubus, Brandon Boyd, was actually in attendance. Well, allegedly, Tim had one of his bodyguards run up and shove human poop into Brandon Boyd's mouth. And you can imagine the confusion and chaos that erupts as Brandon has no idea who Tim Dillon or his security guard even are. So a big brawl breaks out, obviously, and we've got this footage here, and it's hard to tell who's fighting, but rest assured, this is all Tim Dillon's doing, and it seems it's also going to be his undoing. Even more shocking, last week a video was released showing Tim Dillon and Kat Von D making love in a tent at Burning Man in 2017, leading some to believe that Tim Dillon might not even be gay. Maybe the disturbing truth with Tim is that there is no truth. Okay, that's it for now. Tim Dillon, you're a total bitch. Alright TB Nation, our small empire is being threatened by Hulu narcs, so get this video out there and help me expose Tim Dillon before we get shut down. Okay folks, we need to talk about Michelle Wolf. Before now, nobody really knew where she came from or how she rose to power, but this week, BET ran a wild expose on Michelle, and what they claim will shock you. So apparently Michelle was a seemingly normal child up until the 6th grade, when she encountered the popular teen book series Animorphs. Now according to her family, Michelle developed a deep obsession and attachment to these books, and actually believed herself to be capable of animorphing into a wolf. And at the time, her parents thought she was going through some type of fantasy phase. But when they caught her out back, sniffing and allegedly ingesting dog poop, her parents took her to seek professional help. And apparently Michelle had a condition called lycanthropy. Now the only time I've ever heard this word is in association with the make-believe creatures, werewolves. But apparently this is a real mental condition where a patient believes they are genetically partially an animal. And this is not the same thing as being a furry, just for clarification. It's not that Michelle feels her spirit is a wolf and wants to dress up as a humanoid animal hybrid. She literally believes she's partially canine. And this is apparently what has kept Michelle and her family out of communication for the last 15 years, with Michelle refusing to believe that both her parents are human and accusing them of lying to her. Now this is of course tragic. I can only imagine what it's like to raise a child and then having her disown me because she believes a wolf is her real father. But while Michelle might have acted partially canine, she was no dummy and actually did very well in high school. But while in college, apparently Michelle develops a new mental tic, where she starts to dislike anyone else named Michelle. And even if you happen to bring up the TV show Full House, you are likely to get smacked by Michelle Wolf. And it's around this time Michelle's grades start to plummet because instead of attending class, Michelle Wolf was up all night writing letters to MTV demanding they stop airing Michelle Branch's new hit song, claiming Michelle Branch was just Vanessa Carlton in disguise and that she had stolen her identity. Well, Michelle eventually flunks out of college because she won't drop this idea of suing Vanessa Carlton. But apparently flunking out of school brought her back to reality, and she soon dropped the lawsuit idea and found a steady job working at Chase Bank. And she's even said the only reason she started working there was because of the name. You see, through Michelle's eyes, everything is related to wolves. But thankfully she found a way to convert her predatory desires into workplace achievements. She used her competitive wolf spirit to climb the corporate ladder. Apparently Michelle was finally starting to mature. Now it's around this time that Michelle starts taking an improv comedy class with a friend, and eventually finds her way into open mic stand-up comedy. Friends and family were surprised to say the least, but they were just happy that Michelle was trying new things. And after a few years of working at it, eventually she lands a reoccurring part on the funniest show in memory, Late Night with Seth Meyers. It seemed Michelle had gone from being the weird girl to being the it girl, and not the way she used to be called, the it girl. This time it meant she was popular and beloved. And it's around this time that Michelle starts dating celebrity survivalist Bear Grylls. Now her family wasn't really comfortable with the 11-year age gap between the two, and they worried Bear Grylls might just be using Michelle to stay relevant after his latest show about surviving a week in the Playboy Mansion had flopped. So Bear Grylls is actually the one who introduces Michelle to the sport of triathlons and endurance running. And this is a big life changer for Michelle. She becomes really obsessed with it, even to the point where she winds up dumping poor Bear Grylls because he's not a full-time runner like her, even cruelly telling him that she had only ever dated him because his name was Bear. And about a year later, Michelle's life once again changes when she's asked to host the inaugural dinner in 2018. And despite the somber mood of the event, Michelle Wolf killed. This type of achievement put Michelle in the ranks of many greats before her and was sure to boost her to Billy Crystal level notoriety. But after her dazzling performance, apparently Michelle was seen backstage in a tirade screaming, "Where is she?" And according to the White House staff, Michelle Wolf was enraged when she didn't see Michelle Obama in the audience that night. You see, Michelle had never really dropped her aggression towards other famous Michelles. She had just learned to mask it, and she had become so obsessed with taking down the First Lady that she worked her way through the comedy ranks for years just to get to this moment, only to find Michelle Obama was nowhere to be found. Michelle Wolf had in fact never let go of her lycanthropic beliefs and had been hunted hunting all along. And now, according to the White House staff, Michelle Wolf then jumped through a second-story window and landed perfectly on her feet, escaping into the woods that night. And no one has seen her ever since. But we all know she's out there, running, chasing, hunting. And in maybe the strangest turn of all, Vanessa Carlton has recently come out and admitted that Michelle Branch was indeed her with a slightly different haircut, in a naive attempt at copying Garth Brooks' beloved character Chris Gaines. Okay, that's it for now. If you have any wolf sightings, please report them in the comments. Michelle Wolf, wherever you are, you're a total bitch. Alright everyone, there's a lot of bad boys out there, so get in the comments and let me know who to expose next. And as always, TB Nation, I call upon your protection in delivering these life-threatening stories. Okay folks, we need to talk about Tim Heidecker, because you won't believe his twisted past. So everyone knows Tim grew up a rebellious skater in LA who barely stayed out of jail. And one of the only things that kept him from sheer destruction was his love of music. And while many people don't know this, Tim grew up in the same neighborhood as Justin Long. Now at some point during high school, Justin Long starts a band called Lyrical Movement. And by junior year, the band has a big local following and is in talks to sign with a major record label. And they were stylistically emo, with influences that ranged from Atreyu to From First to Last. Well, out of nowhere, the guitarist Brendan Harris quits the band, citing his Christian beliefs conflicting with the band's rock and roll image, leaving them searching for a new member. And that's when Tim Heidecker joins the band Lyrical Movement. And you can imagine the excitement of joining a group that's about to be signed to a major label. It must have seemed too good to be true. Well, if it did seem that way, then it seemed that they had seemed correctly. Days before signing the record deal, Justin Long gets cold feet and backs out of the deal. See, Justin was already acting back then, and his agent at the time talked him out of signing with a major label for fear of them controlling his client. And it appears Justin chose correctly, as he very quickly shot into the Hollywood stratosphere as an actor, with a career that certainly outlasted whatever his emo band might have accomplished. So a young Tim Heidecker learns his band is now breaking up rather than rocking on MTV, and that sends Tim into deep despair. You can imagine how horrible it would feel to be so close to that type of success and then have it pulled away from you. Well, over time, his mind turned into a twisted, bitter rage, with Tim secretly vowing to get even with Justin Long. But Tim had no way of reaching his goal of revenge at the moment, so he set his sights on other figures he thought deserved to get taken down. And that's what started the now 22-year public feud between Tim and Mo Rocca. See, at the time of the band breaking up, Tim was stuck back at home all summer with nothing to do, and found himself watching VH1's I Love the 80s. And he became transfixed on Mo Rocca, believing him to be undeserving of an authoritative position on 1980s pop culture. So Tim uses the then popular website Napster to download Mo Rocca's home address, and he begins his campaign of letters. And reportedly, Tim wrote a 3-page letter to Mo Rocca every day for 2 full years. And while we can't say there's any direct link, after this era, the public really didn't see any more of Mo Rocca. It seemed that Tim had successfully gotten into his head. Now apparently Tim did this same cruel ritual to Lucy Lawless and a handful of other actors in the early 2000s that all seemed to step away from acting shortly after. But then he moved from physical letters to the internet, and that's where he really saw the effects of his cruel taunting. Now you probably don't know this, but Fieldy, the bassist of Korn, actually put out a solo rap album. And this is not a joke, go look this up. But Tim was delighted to find this CD on Korn's website. He then joined the website chat room and he basically mocked it until the band removed the entire album. So Tim is feeling the power and loving it. But this isn't a career. He still has to find a path in life to move on past Lyrical Movement. And that's when Tim starts getting very clever. You see, Tim's father owns a copywriting firm. And while Tim could have worked for his dad and had a well-paying job, his hatred of Justin Long wouldn't let him settle for this office life. But Tim did see the value in his father's firm. You see, Tim started using inside information to take advantage of people who had never technically copyrighted their business or idea. And then Tim would himself claim the copyright and legally steal other people's IP. For example, the show you know as Tom Goes to the Mayor is actually taken from the 1970s Hindu cartoon Anika Visits the King. And the beloved Tim and Eric Awesome Show Great Job is just this Japanese comedy show that they left the direct translation of the name because they thought it was funny. And apparently Tim's bad stand-up character is just a Chris Titus half-hour he never bothered to copyright. And at one point, Tim even attempted to copyright the religion of Buddhism, claiming the religion would benefit from organization. And this is just Tim's game. He's never come up with an idea of his own, he just copyrights other people's golden material. Even his podcast, Office Hours, which is him, DJ Doug Pound, and Vic Berger, Tim has dubbed as the Trinity. Well, guess what, folks? he took that too. You see, the Holy Trinity is really just the Big Three. That's right, the Don Barris-led comedic group that created the cult smash hit Windy City Heat. Now, apparently, Tim was able to legally steal this property right from under poor Don Barris's feet, and that's why you haven't seen any Big Three projects since the beginning of Office Hours. Legally speaking, these three can't even work together anymore, and it's all because of Tim Heidecker. So Tim turns poor Vic Berger into his personal Perry Caravello, aka a human punching bag, and replicates Don Barris's already successful brand. And Tim is really gaining power at this point. He's becoming friends with SNL cast members and making his way to Justin. And you might not know this, but the handful of horror movies that Tim does during this time are actually all just to make fun of Justin Long's foray into the genre. But at some point, Tim apparently realizes that no matter how much he tries to catch up, Justin is always going to be ahead because he started much younger and had already been a movie star for years. So Tim does something truly shocking and signs a contract with the Magellan Corporation. And if you don't know who this is, it's basically a giant international conglomerate that owns companies like William Morris, Coca-Cola, Monsanto, and basically any other notorious American company you can think of. And signing with Magellan is not like signing with a manager or an agency. This company isn't subject to any local jurisdiction and is largely secretive. And while it seems unlikely to be true, Alex Jones alleges the Magellan Corporation is similar to the secret society known as Skull and Crossbones, and claims that they have sick rituals including eating human excrement to extract power. But with clients like Robin Williams and Denzel Washington, it's clear they're an elite club, and that's exactly what Tim needed. See, apparently Tim used his power to start getting every Justin Long movie offer shut down. Now, there was allegedly going to be a Red Hot Chili Peppers movie stylized like Across the Universe, being a semi-musical with Justin Long as Anthony Kiedis, but Tim was quick to put the kibosh on that. And that's why you don't really see Justin in movies anymore, other than a few random indie horror flicks that he's been relegated to. So Tim Heidecker successfully smites Justin Long, but then he finds himself unsure of what to do next. He feels for the first time completely lost, and that's when he turned back to Buddhism, but not to the practice. He turned back to his original idea of copywriting the religion. Now, with the power of the Magellan Corporation, he wasn't limited by local law. And recently, online sleuthers found this 800-acre plot in Ethiopia legally owned by one Tim Heidecker, littered with strange buildings, leading some to believe he's beta testing his organized religion here. And there's plenty more controversies with Tim, like the celebrity boxing match between him and Sheryl Crow that many said Tim took too seriously. But we'll have to save that for another time. Until then, Tim Heidecker, you're a total bitch. Okay, TB Nation, we've got some big fish coming up, so prepare for the shockwave of a lifetime. Okay, it's time to talk about Andrew Schulz, because this player might actually be a hater. Now, we all know him as the smooth-talking white boy from Guy Code, his podcast and stand-up specials, but most people don't know that Andrew used to be very different. See, apparently, Andrew was very much a quiet kid growing up in Florida, who preferred to stay indoors and watch anime. And in his youth, he went by Drew and preferred to spell it J-R-U, which led others to ridicule him, saying only a moron would choose to spell their own name wrong. Well, needless to say, Andrew didn't have many friends, and that's where his love of TV developed. And it's sometime in high school where Andrew becomes particularly obsessed with the show Sabrina the Teenage Witch. And of course, this made him even more of an outcast. But there was one positive development from his love of this TV show. Now, apparently there's an episode where Sabrina goes ballroom dancing, and for whatever reason, this grabbed the young Andrew, and he was soon enrolled in traditional ballroom dance class. And this was actually something he excelled at, and was a social group who didn't see him as odd. So it seemed Andrew had finally found his footing. That is, until he got severely injured during a performance during a momentary act-out gone wrong. See, they had planned on the ballroom dance music cutting out, and Andrew quickly mimicking Michael Jackson's iconic crotch grab, thinking this would be hilarious and make the crowd erupt. But when the song cut off sooner than Andrew had anticipated, he rushed into his position, falling and breaking both his legs and feet. Well, you can imagine this must have been a very dark time for poor Andrew. He was going to be bedridden for a year before he could even learn how to walk again, and was going to be cut off from his only passion and friend group. Well, fate has a funny way of working, because Andrew being locked in bed is what led him to learn coding. And by the time he could walk again a year later, he already had a healthy career, with regular work from some big-name clients. And one of those clients was The Daily Show. So now Andrew works for a hip TV show. Seems like an upgrade, right? Well, he quickly experienced what his rank was as a website coder, and found that he wasn't really socially included the same way he was as a child. Well, this is where it gets weird. So at that time working on The Daily Show, is one Hasan Minhaj, who would later go on to host his own comedic political show. But what you might not know about Hasan Minhaj is that at the time he was also a recruiter for G. Wayne, which is a legal consulting firm owned of course by the Magellan Corporation. And this is a firm that basically gets celebrities out of jams. They build legal tactics to protect their big name clients and are known for being more than shady. And this is the same legal firm that Warner Brothers called upon when Logan Paul got into his Japanese forest controversy. If you remember, at the time it threatened to end his career. So Warner Bros. Paid big bucks for G. Wayne to develop something called LT38. And what this is a whole new language and a way of speaking that renders you legally not accountable for anything you say. Let me break this down for you. All these no-cap boys that talk with a partially black, partially Hispanic, partially internet accent are not the fools you think they are. In fact, they've all been trained in legalese to speak like this intentionally, so they can't be sued no matter what they say. They can sell you products and bogus info, it doesn't matter as long as they're speaking LT38. But how does Andrew Schulz go from being a web programmer to being the no-cap fire Riz chud that he is today? Well, apparently the only way to get LT38 legally recognized is if public figures use it regularly for one business year. So the G. Wayne firm tasks Hasan Minhaj with recruiting some easily coachable duds to place on hit shows. And it didn't take long for the internet to take over, seeing millions of 10-year-olds calling their parents sus mid-ass pony bitches. So Andrew Schulz really isn't special at all. He's just one of 4 people who were lucky enough to get the role. And when the cameras are off, the LT38 is off. You can even see traces of the real Andrew still out there, as he regularly likes Melissa Joan Hart's Facebook posts. And recently we've seen a bitter Hasan Minhaj get kicked off X, which is hard to do. But apparently he feels he got a raw deal in the end, seeing all his recruits continually growing in fame while he has seemingly stalled out. He claims he is the first and original no-cap boy and that he taught them all everything they know. From caring about clean shoes for no real reason to constantly getting haircuts up to 3 to 4 times a day, and so on. This post really goes on forever. And it is interesting. Hasan was indeed the frontrunner in using LT38, but has been surpassed by many of the people he taught. And recently everyone's been pointing out Andrew's overtly bad haircut, dye job, and mustache, leading some to believe that he might have actually signed with the Magellan Corporation and could be enduring some of their ritualistic humiliation. But why would Andrew Schulz sign his life away to the Magellan Corporation when he was already successful? Well, it's recently come out that Andrew has applied to every season of Dancing with the Stars since he became successful, but has never been chosen to be on the show. So apparently Andrew's real desire is to prove his ballroom dance skills on national TV. But finding himself unable to get the gig, it seems he signed a deal with the devil just to get his shot on the dance floor. Now there's plenty more weird stuff about this guy, like the fact that he still claims he was bit on the foot by a rat that had glowing chemicals on it, or his secret anime full back piece tattoo, but we'll have to save that for another time. Until then, Andrew Schulz, you're a total bitch. Okay, TB Nation, after releasing this information, the Warner Bros. Thugs are gonna come to try to smash my ass. So it's up to you to spread the truth. The TB truth. Okay folks, we need to talk about Katy Perry, because she just dropped a new album in hopes of getting the public to focus on that rather than her dark business dealings. So to understand who she really is, you have to go back to before she was known as Katy Perry, to when she was known by her real name, which is actually Chady Hudson. Now the public believes that Chady was raised in a strict Christian house, but that's only because that's the story she told to get into the band POD. And many might not know this, but this is real. Katy Perry was actually in the Christian rap rock band POD, and she was the Chester Bennington of this group. But it's not long before Chady gets kicked out of POD for being an all-around fraudster. She had put out a solo Christian CD as well, but when word got around Nashville that someone had seen her drinking an alcoholic cider at Rocketown, she was all but kicked out of the Christian music industry. So Chady Hudson decides to become Katy Perry. But how does she jump from Christian rap rock band obscurity to the megastar she is today? Well, while POD was playing live on Jay Leno, one of the guests that night was Theo Von's uncle, Struben von Ribbentrop, who ran the world's largest sugar company, Sudzucker AG. And after playing their beautiful song, Chady Hudson is approached by Struben, who is looking for up-and-coming pop stars for some big-name brand deals. So Chady Hudson signs with Sudzucker AG with an endorsement deal like you've never heard of. This German sugar company basically offered to pay for everything, from recording to promotion and even touring. And all Katy had to do in return was include lyrics about candy and sweets in every song. And if you look back, you'll remember there was this insane effort hard to have Katy Perry associated with sugary products. From cupcakes to lollipops, cherry chapstick, and chocolate sharks, in retrospect, Katy Perry was just a walking Mars bar advertisement. And it's around this time that Katy Perry agrees to the fake arranged relationship with Russell Brand, landing her an extra $23 million annually from sponsorships alone. And we all know this was obviously a fake relationship and that Russell Brand has done everything he can to keep the public from knowing he's gay, claiming drug addiction, rehab, sex addiction, too many women. Yeah, sure, Russell. And it's kind of embarrassing looking back on it that we didn't all spot it. It's very obvious that Russell Brand is a gay man. Well, this is actually where things start to go off the rails. I guess after years of keeping up fake identities and seeing the disastrous results of pushing sugar onto children, Katy starts feeling human feelings. She actually starts feeling guilty and that what she's doing is all fake, which indeed was true. And this is when we see Katy leave Russell Brand and start spewing some radical theories online, including encouraging her fans to stop wiping their butts. You might remember this short-lived era where Katy Perry was telling her fans to quote-unquote free dry after using the bathroom, claiming it's much better for the environment, which quickly led to backlash as many fans reported a horrible rash and claimed dried poop flecks had ended up all over the place, leading some of them to accidentally ingest it. So Katy clearly wanted out. She wanted to be done with this sugar push, but Sudsucker AG was not going to lose their golden goose. And that's when they introduced Katy Perry to one Zooey Deschanel and show Katy how easy it would be to replace her. Now, if you remember, Zooey Deschanel used to have blonde hair and not look anything like Katy Perry, but with Sudsucker AG's funding, anything was possible. So Katy is now faced with an open option with true moral implications. She could walk away from this madness right now and be done with it, but Zooey Deschanel was going to be taking her place. Well, it turns out Katy isn't such a great person because she reasoned that if someone was going to do it anyways, it might as well be her. So Katy Perry puts her temporary morality aside and carries on with the sugary charade. But Sudsucker AG wasn't going to just let her rebellion slide, forcing Katy to cut off her hair and dye it blonde, making her appear to be a ripoff of Miley Cyrus, who had ripped off Pink, who had actually ripped off Robin. They also forced her to do a reality show, which was an obvious punishment for someone who was an international celebrity. And they made the focus of her next music video basketball simply because one of the regional factories had overstocked 10,000 pallets of tiny chocolate basketballs. They were able to sell off all the potential loss, which was great for the company, but not great for Katy's image. You see, people had grown accustomed to Katy having delicious sweets in her videos, and when this basketball-themed comedy video dropped, the sugary haze seemed to wear off on the public. For the first time, people could see Katy Perry for what she was, a sugar industry plant. While at one time she could use people like Rebecca Black to make herself look generous and caring, now it was clear Katy Perry was no different than the backpack kid. She was just like any other loser trying to look cool. So Katy all but disappears for years to come, and the public seemed to have no problem with this. And while she tried to stay in the headlines by engaging in another fake relationship with a gay man, even this didn't seem to work. And so Sudsucker AG comes up with a new game plan, one last shot to sell their product. So you might have noticed that Katy Perry is once again back on reality TV for no apparent reason. Well, this time Katy isn't pushing candy, but rather junk food as a whole. You see, Sudsucker AG used the latest algorithms and worldwide consumer data to build the Katy Perry that 2024 wanted. And apparently the most three desired things when averaged across the board worldwide are pizza, breasts, and Jason Momoa. So they've got Katy Perry pushing pepperoni in skimpy outfits while slowly bulking up with the help of steroids to look closer to Jason Momoa. And this trend just might work. People don't even really know what they're looking at. It's the marketing of the future, playing into our basic subconscious topical trends. And with this new Terminator-like Katy Perry, it's safe to say Chady is long gone. And whether it's selling you on some corrupt faraway war or selling you gumdrops, she's got no problem with the millions of deaths she continues to cause. Now, there's plenty more about this freak, including her belief that numbers aren't real, and that anyone who participates in math is performing witchcraft. But we'll have to save that for another time. Until then, Katy Perry, you're a total bitch. Alright everyone, thank you for your continued support in spreading the TB truth. While some continue to try to shut us down, we will remain strong and continue to air out the disgusting laundry of the evil men and women of Hollywood.